This video is a continuation from the previous. So the best advice I can give you about this is to just reflect upon the feedback and learn from it if you can. Think about what was the content of the message that was conveyed. Move past the defensiveness to genuinely analyze the feedback. And if you need to take some time to do that, or you need to practice, first thing you want to know is, was it justified? I mean, if it's not, then right there you can stop and say, okay, well, that's their opinion, but I don't see validity in it. Or you could go to them and say, I don't really understand. I'd like more. I'd like to understand better and get more information. I'm not saying just reject constructive criticism or feedback because you didn't like it, because then that would defeat the purpose of the process at all. But consider it. Always consider it before you decide to walk away from it. So if somebody says to you, hey, what about this? And you say, okay, that's legitimate. How can you use it to improve? And if you don't know, maybe ask the person who gave it for some suggestions. Well, what were you thinking? How do you think I can improve this? And so it's really important to understand what the feedback is. And you do want to analyze it. It's human nature when if someone comes at us or speaks to us in a way that feels like they're coming at us, we're going to get defensive. And we automatically want to dismiss what they're saying, or we don't want to like the person. And you're going to find that your circle gets very, very, very small. And then you're just surrounded by people who tell you what you want to hear, and you'll never grow as an architect, an artist, a designer, anything, a human being. However, partly when we get defensive, it's because we know that there's some legitimacy to the criticism. So be honest with yourself. This is tough. It does take practice to learn to accept it. It's why you're going to do it in this program, so that by the time you get out in the real world, we have prepared you for being able to have practiced and be ready to accept it. And not only do that, but to seek it. I'm one of those people who goes out and asks. I believe knowledge is power. I don't think I've talked about this yet, but if you think about it, all information is empowering to some degree, depending on what you do with it. Now, the sky is blue. I mean, that's knowledge. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's power. But knowing that you've missed a room, you've left a room that the client wanted out of your plan is knowledge, and it is empowering because you now have the power to fix it and to make sure you don't go to the client, because you really don't want the client telling you that you've made that huge mistake. Oops, I can't get to my next slide because my mouse is not cooperating. There we go. I don't know. It doesn't like this mouse pad. It might need to be cleaned. So once you get past the whole, this is really not about me, this is just somebody trying to help, you then want to consider if it's justified, to what extent, and what you should do with it. And even if you don't think some of the feedback is accurate, you shouldn't just automatically dismiss it. You just want to think about, is there something else I can pull out of this? And then if you just decided that they were way off base in their critique, you can still look for things to learn from the situation and rack it up as experience. Because you're going to, whether you like it or not, all artists get feedback, and they get unsolicited feedback. And all you have to do is go to social media where there's work posted with comments. There's a whole movement now called intuitive art. And that would make a great conversation, because there's some fighting over classically trained artists and these people who have created monetized videos, and they're selling their work that is not based on principles and elements of design. It it is semi-deliberate, right? We talked about how design is a deliberate intent and involves planning. And a lot of the intuitive art is just about doing it without thinking about it. And I can make the argument for both ways. So I don't have a dog in the show, and I don't have an intuitive art channel, and I have not attacked any of the people doing it. Um, I can see both sides of the argument, and they both have valid points. But so those people that are doing that, my point being, those point that are people that are doing it are getting a lot of criticism, and not constructive, and they didn't even ask for. They're just doing their thing, and they're getting it. And so you're going to, and if you talked to any well-known artist, they would tell you they get negative feedback, negative criticism, despite the fact that they're, an expert in their field. So it's something unavoidable. Therefore, the best thing you can do is to learn how to deal with it, and make the best use of it, because it's coming whether or not you want it to. Okay, so this was just an example. Just, if you got feedback about how you said something that wasn't accurate, you had checked a couple of different sources and then compared the information in your presentation, and then you find out you're correct, well, then you wouldn't necessarily have to change your presentation, but the research you did will help you know that there's a common misconception. And so it might help you when you're out there and an audience member decides to ask you a question about your presentation. Or we can turn this to ours, right? So say you're in a critique with colleagues, somebody says this isn't right, you get multiple sources, you look it up, you do your math, you make sure that it is. And so when you're presenting to the client, you go ahead and preemptively say, it came up in a critique that maybe this, and these are my sources. I did the research and verified that it's actually what I'm presenting to you. So you see, it's not a bad thing if you use it to your benefit, and you're doing that in a way that doesn't hurt anyone. You wouldn't name who gave you the feedback or embarrass anybody. I mean, that's not the goal. It's just to say, hey, I know, you're kind of like, hey, I know what you're thinking, but let me assure you that I did my research on this and verified that it is what I'm presenting to you. And that just makes you more trustworthy. And then learn something and move on. There's some sage sayings out there from multiple cultures about how, people who harbor resentment only hurt themselves, basically. And that is true. And so learn what you can and then move past it, because there's no reason to let it eat you up. That's another thing. We all make mistakes, and in the beginning, you guys are going to make a lot. This is hard. There's a lot of moving parts and pieces. It's hard to get it right. So, okay. So there are 4 steps to art criticism. And I am going to give you all this PowerPoint. So I'm not going to go through it very slowly. I'm going to go through it kind of quickly. But I want you all to go back through it and read through it a couple of times to help you understand. And when we talk about art criticism, we are including architecture, because architecture is a fine art. Okay, so we're going to define them and then go through an example of how to apply them to a famous work of art. And that by learning these techniques, you're better able to apply and communicate design intent in your own work. And you're also able to do that with your coworkers and their work. So the 4 steps are: you're going to describe what you see. The second is you're going to analyze what you see, the work. And third, you're going to interpret it. And then fourth, you're going to assess it. And that is the feedback. That is where you come in and say, okay. So in order to you guys have seen me do this with every intro to every lecture, is to describe and define. And that is what you need to do. You need to make sure that what you're assessing is the same as what the person thinks is being assessed that you're talking to. It avoids a lot of conflict. Okay, so the first step, you give a description of the artwork, and you're going to use the elements of design. For instance, here's a piece of artwork, and I've gone through and said the painting is of a woman, right? Just so you know, the title Idalia is a Greek name meaning behold the sun. And she picked that name to evoke the heat of summertime and the strength and beauty of womankind. Summer colors are used in shades of pink, which is associated with femininity. The line work is very delicate, very feminine. The shapes are both geometric and organic. The organic shapes are very floral. The negative space shows two shades of pink. One is bold and the other is subtle. The positive space is a portrait of a woman. Now, I'm defining what I'm going to eventually assess. Now, that's a lot, and you normally don't do it this way. You would just say, for instance, you're going to give somebody constructive feedback, and you're going to say, let's talk about the line work. And the line work I see is very delicate and feminine. Okay? You are now speaking to the person that you're giving feedback to. You are telling them what you see. You're defining where you're going. And usually at that point they're either going to nod or they're going to say, "Well, no, that's not what I see." And that's when you can get your terms right, okay? That gives you an opportunity to communicate. Then you're going to move on to analyzing. You're going to explain how the artwork is organized. What's the format? And then in this case, we just say choose 3, but you're going to just it's going to be off the cuff. So for instance, we can say there's a rhythm to the composition in those brush strokes and the repetition of the petals that form the flowers in her hair. You can almost hear the music these visual notes would play, right? We're analyzing what they did with that line work in order to understand what they've done. And then again, the person that you're talking to will either agree or disagree, and you'll now have a full understanding of what it is that you are about to assess. I know it's not always that simple, but this is the right way to do it if you want to build the relationship with the person that you are giving feedback to in a way that is not threatening to them. Okay? Now we're going to interpret it. You explain the mood or the meaning of an artwork in your terms. You can't say, "I don't like it, I do like it." That doesn't count as interpretation because it's not about you either. It's not about them, but it's not about you. So you would say the work sends a message that femininity in shape, color, line, etc. can still be proud and strong. Because despite the pink hues, it's a confident and strong portrait that shows the power of summer harnessed in the strength of this woman. Right? So now we have had a conversation with the person that we're giving feedback to about what the work is. We've made it clear that we understand what we're seeing. So now this is where we are going to assess. So in the final step, you decide whether or not the artwork is successful based on one of 3 aesthetic views. The artwork is successful if the goal was to be realistic, and it is. Or the artwork is successful if it creates a strong mood or feeling. Or the artwork is successful if the artist successfully used the elements and principles together to make a good composition. You only pick one and you justify your answer. The black lines that compose the face show a woman who is strong and determined, which is a mood that evokes a sense of power in others who connect to the painting. Idalia may inspire them to feel the same level of confidence in themselves. Based on that strong mood or feeling, this is a successful work of art. Okay, see how that works? Now, if it didn't, this is where the feedback comes in. If it was not successful, this is where you say, the goal was to do this, but the work does something else. What if instead of those black lines, say the lines hadn't been black, say they'd been a pastel color. What if you then suggested they be black so that it ties into what you've done? Okay? So that's it. And that's how you give really good, effective feedback without anybody feeling defensive. Okay, I'm going to stop here and continue in the next video.